How long before fiat disappears and the CBDC is the judge, the jury and the turnkey?
Well, central bank cryptocurrency, digital currency, well, we're sort of really there at the moment, which people sort of don't realise. When you go into your bank, let's say you go into your bank and you want to borrow £20,000 to buy a car. It's created, if you're considered by the bank to be a good risk, they will create it electronically. So they'll tap in, Fred Snooks, bloody good bloke, he's good for £20,000 to buy a car, and they tap it in, credit your account. That money doesn't really exist. That doesn't really exist. It's just fake. It's just digital money. It's electronic. And they put your account, you go buy the car, and that transfers to the guy who's selling you the car, blah, blah, blah. And that's how it goes on. So we are really already there. We already have a digital stroke crypto sort of currency. It's all fake, which is how we got into this mess. By creating money out of thin air, which is by its very nature inflationary. And we do it on an industrial scale. And it's interesting that the international debt, if you include corporate debt, private debt and national debt, is $270 trillion. Well, that's beyond human imagination, isn't it? Do you know what $270 trillion means? I don't know what it means. And if you add derivatives, which are another form of credit for the banks, we're talking quadrillions. I don't know what a quadrillion is, and I'm in the business. So it's just getting more and more absurd, more and more ridiculous, and so it's all going to go off pop sooner or later. And they'll have to sort of reinvent themselves somehow. What you can always bank on, the little guy that pays the price. It'll be the little guys, the small businesses, the individual, the old age pensioner. They'll be picking up the tab for this. George Soros, all the big politicians, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all these people will be okay. They'll be okay. It'll be you that suffers. But you can get smart. Get smart. Think about it. If you've got gold in specie, you're outside the game plan. And that's where you want to stay.
Douglas, next. I'd like to hear your take on why banks and building societies are slow to pass on higher interest rates to savers.
Well, you're talking about really corporate human behaviour here. It's the same reason that we've seen the price of oil per barrel come down reasonably significantly in the last 2 months, but it's not come down at the pump. If they can go on making a profit by fiddling you with giving you rubbish interest, or they can still sell you petrol at above what the barrelage would suggest it should be, they will go on doing that because it's the profit motive that drives them, not unreasonably. Don't be a sucker. People have got to understand that you've got to shop around. Shop around for your petrol station. Where's it the cheapest? Shop around to see who's giving you the best interest rate, but don't increase your risk. At the moment, it doesn't matter if you've got your money in a bank or building society, your money's at risk because they're all going to go broke. They're all insolvent. And it doesn't really matter how much interest rate they give you anyway, does it? Because it's pathetic. When you've got 11% inflation, they're giving you 2 or 2.5% or even 3%. It's pointless, isn't it? So don't be a mug. Don't be a mug. Don't be a sucker.
Zach, next. Do you think the banks have recovered at all from 2008 regarding ring fencing and fractional reserve banking? I'm writing my dissertation on the crash and post-crash recovery attempts.
Well, Zach, they haven't done anything. They haven't done anything. And I was sitting on the Monetary and Economic Affairs Committee in the European Parliament trying to persuade them to actually do something so it shouldn't come again. So the disaster couldn't happen again. That was in 2008, 2009. I made some speeches, hit over 6, 7, 10 million views. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. We still have fractional reserve banking. It's just that the debt's even greater. So nothing's happened. Basel III, the new banking regulation came in, but it really only scraped at the surface. It hasn't really done anything. You will not get any change in fractional reserve banking till you make it illegal. And it was illegal in America in the mid-1900s. And if you indulged in that kind of banking, you could go to prison or even hang. So they have to change it. They have to change it. So you've got to understand that when you give your money to a bank, they give you an account or a slip, which is a receipt the money then becomes theirs under the Banking Charter Act of the 1840s, I think it was. So it becomes their money. All this has to change. The legislation has to change. None of the legislation has changed. None of the regulation has changed significantly. So no, nothing's happened. So nothing can be done. So which is why, and if you look at the price of banks, look at the share price of banks. Look at the Deutsche Bank. The share price for Deutsche Bank has fallen by something like 90% in the last 3 or 4 years. The market's telling you that these banks are insolvent. And now we've got the problem with Credit Suisse. And they've just been given something like $60 billion or something by the Fed to try and save them because they're an international bank. They are all insolvent. Credit Agricole, Santander, our own banks, most European banks. The American banks aren't quite so bad, but they're not much better, but they're better. Which is why I wrote my book, Magic of Banking. Excuse me plugging my bank. If you're doing your dissertation, you'll do very well to get my book. It's only a tenner or something. You can get it on Kindle or whatever. Get my book, and you will find there what you won't find on the shelves at your university or your school. That's the truth about banking. That's the truth about banking. You won't find that at a modern university. Oh, no, no, no.
Jellybeans wants to know more about what a bank bail-in is and why no one at NatWest appears to understand the term or has ever heard of it. Are we being gaslighted?
Well, your poor little bank clerk at NatWest or wherever it is, who's probably done a fortnight's course, bless her or him, don't really know anything at all about it. How could they? When 2008 came along and all the banks went bankrupt, they went down the tubes, and it started with Northern Rock, if you remember, in 2008. We had a bailout. The government bailed out all the banks and building societies with taxpayers' money, which again helped degrade money and brought in more inflation. That was a bailout, all pretty straightforward and fairly easy to understand. Now, the government didn't want to be caught again on bailing out. They didn't want to bail out. So they came up with something called a bail-in. And that's now international. Bail-in's international. You'll find the same in Australia. You'll find the same here. You'll find the same in Europe. So that the government's not on the hook to bail out with your deposit guarantee of 80,000 euros or whatever it is. So they're not on the hook. They've come up with a bail-in, which means the banks can issue paper in lieu of giving you money back that your deposit was. They will give you preferential bonds, preferential stocks, all sorts of wonderful pieces of paper, pieces of credit paper to the value of what you deposited. It's worthless, of course. It's absolutely worthless. They're not even going to be beautiful like the old Chinese bonds, which people now collect because they're works of art. The whole thing is a con. It's to get the government off the hook for having to bail out the banks again. It's called a bail-in. And they're certainly not going to put that through their training courses for their staff, because their staff would go, they don't want their staff to expose it. They don't want people going into the bank saying, just a minute, if you run off with you're insolvent, you run off with my money, what will you give me in exchange? They don't want their staff to tell you about something which is so inherently worthless. So that's the difference between a bail-in and a bail-out, and it's bail-in time.
Very straightforward question from Fiona. Is property a good investment?
Well, Fiona, I'm not an expert on property. I would say, and you must make your own decision, so it's not for me to really pass an opinion, but most property investment is commercial property. Now, most people are working from home. There's only about a 40 or 45% occupancy rate now in this country, and I think America's the same, of corporate occupation of property, because nobody's going into work. We're going back to hot desking and Zooming. So would you put your money into an asset class which is clearly in the short term doomed to fail? I would suggest not. But you must make your own call. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.